But there was talk about him creating some kind of an MJ-12, or some kind of a document. Also, in 1980, Moore hooked up with a fellow named Bob Pratt, who had been a reporter for National Enquirer, who'd done some wonderful work on UFOs. If you in the late 70s, early 80s, if you were reading National Enquirer for the UFO stories, you were getting very accurate information because Bob Pratt was investigating the stories, and he wasn't making the stuff up. He was just publishing what he could find, honestly publishing what he could find. And they had been writing a science fiction novel in which the Majestic 12 surfaces for the first time. Well, later on, Bill Moore says that his friend Shami Shandera had received these documents on an undeveloped roll of film from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Well, there's an amazing coincidence right there. But also, which also ties this in, Todd Zeckel had been talking to Bill Moore about the Del Rio crash and what he'd learned about it. And according to what Zeckel had been saying, he gave Moore all the information about the Del Rio crash. And what I suspect happened is that Moore believed that Willingham was a high-ranking Air Force officer, and so to cover this, they inserted into the MJ-12 document the stuff about the Del Rio crash, but in that they say that the craft had been basically incinerated, so there'd be little evidence to be recovered, as a way of acknowledging the crash and making the document seem more authentic, but precluding Zeckel from going forward with his plans to publish a book about it. So I think it's all tied in there, and when you look at the dynamics of what's going on, I think that's where the MJ-12 document originated. It was designed specifically to propel those who had the documents, meaning Moore, Shandera, and later Stan Friedman, and I think Stan Friedman had absolutely no hand in this at all, propel them into the spotlight, which it did. Mm. And kept that going for another 6 or 7 years. But now as we look at the information contained in the document, one of the things that strikes me and has struck others is the information contained in the document is the state of ufology or the Roswell investigation as it existed in 1980 as opposed to where it is in 2009. We have moved beyond the information in there. We've learned a great deal about the Roswell case, and the information about Roswell is inaccurate. The information about the Del Rio case is inaccurate. There's no mention of a crash on the plains of San Augustine, which is a good thing for me because I don't believe there was a crash there, and it's a bad thing for Stan because if this is a briefing paper for the president about the state of ufology in 1952, why isn't that mentioned in there? Mm. So it's a paper that was designed in the 1980s to reflect the state of the investigation in the 1980s, and yet today we know so much more. We can point out all the flaws into it. So it's a paper filled with anachronisms.
Does this mean to you that a group like MJ-12 never existed, or is it just they're trying to replicate something that actually potentially was happening in reality at that time? That there was a group formed and there was investigations looking into the UFO phenomena, but it was like MJ-12 in itself is a code name for another group. What's your take on that, Kevin?
We have run into one witness, General Arthur Exon, who had been the base commander at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in the 1970s, and he had been assigned to the base in 1947 as a lieutenant colonel. General Exon told me, I think he told Don Schmidt, and I think he told several others, that there had been some kind of an oversight committee at the Pentagon that ran the UFO operations. He called them the Unholy 13 because he didn't know what the name of the group was. Mm. So the Unholy 13, and I think some of the skeptics have seized on this, is that was the name of the group, but no, it really isn't. It was just the name he applied to it for his own ease of I guess, referring to them. That was responsible for the UFO phenomenon, would be responsible for exploiting the find at Roswell. One of the things he told me that I found a little bit surprising when he said it was Stuart Symington, who had been a senator from Missouri to the United States Congress, was involved in this, and I couldn't understand why you would have an elected official at that level involved in this MJ-12 committee until I discovered that Stuart Symington had been the Undersecretary for Air in the old War Department and then later moved into the Department of Defense. In 1947, he had been an appointee in this high civilian position over the United States Air Force. So then it made sense. MJ-12 mentions nothing about Stuart Symington. Well, it makes sense that he should be there. The second thing that struck me was if this crash took place in 1947, why is Eisenhower not involved in it in 1947? He was the chairman, the chief of staff of the Army, which was broken into the ground forces, the air forces at the time in 1947. He's the number one guy in the military. He's the number one Army guy. So if the crash takes place and the Army recovered it in Roswell, which they did, it would have gone up the chain of command from the 509th headquarters in Roswell to the 8th Air Force headquarters in Fort Worth to the Strategic Air Command headquarters, which at that time were in Washington, D.C., to the Chief of Staff's office. He would have already known about it. The briefing paper becomes unimportant at that point. So he should have been on the committee, but he wasn't. So the point simply is this: there would have been some sort of commission, committee, group responsible for this, the investigation of this. It would have been made up of top scientists, top military officers. Some of the names on the MJ-12 document, Devlin Bronk, for example, von Neumann as another example of scientists at the top, should have been involved. But the military officers that you would expect to be involved, such as Eisenhower, were not. That was delegated to other people, and I find that a little bit suspicious. So there would have been some kind of committee. The MJ-12 document suggests there's a committee, but it doesn't really name all the right people.
So again, it doesn't discredit the fact that the government has been involved potentially in crash retrieval or trying to understand the phenomena and all this. It's just the validity of the documents themselves seems to be fraudulent. Is that correct?
That's right. And now we to the point where there's literally thousands of MJ-12 documents. Stan Friedman himself has rejected the vast majority of them. It all comes back to the original few documents: the Eisenhower briefing document, the Truman memo. There's a Cutler-Twining memo that was found in the National Archives, and they hold this up and say, see, we have a providence for that. But the National Archives tells us, well, all we will say is this document, the Cutler-Twining memo, is a document in our possession, but it wasn't found where it should have been. It wasn't created the way it should have been. We don't know whether it's authentic or not, but it's a document that is held in our collections. So we have no real provenance for the documents, and this is the huge stumbling block. We don't know where they came from. All research into MJ-12 has never produced a single document relating to MJ-12 with a known provenance from a government source. Never has that happened. And you would think, given the size of the search for MJ-12 materials, you would have found something like that, but it's never happened. Stan tells me, he says, well, that the lack of provenance may be suggestive of it being authentic. And if you talk to any question document examiner, they'll tell you a lack of provenance is, in fact, evidence of it being a forgery.
There's just a strange little side note here in terms of the Cutler-Twining memo that you mentioned. Apparently Chandra and Moore received postcards with a return address to Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, and the cards contained a series of cryptic messages referring to Reese's Pieces and Suitland and things like this. What do you make of that, Kevin? Have you researched that at all?
This seems to me to be something born of a mind that is more in tune with Hollywood than it is the way things work in the real world. I spent time as an intelligence officer in the Air Force, and admittedly, I was at a very low level in the intelligence field. I think my job was more akin to being a reporter than anything else, where I'd gather information and provide it to our flight crews in a non